Fall migration is already underway, but it's a harrowing journey back north for the hundreds of bird species flying through Wisconsin. Window collisions are a leading cause of bird deaths, causing up to 3.5 billion bird deaths in the U.S. each year. For this month's Chirp Chat, Lake Effect's expert Nunez spoke about the ongoing efforts to make places more bird-friendly, with Brenna Marsacek from the Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance and Lisa Gomnitz from SOS Save Our Songbirds. Marsacek first explains why birds are vulnerable to window collisions.
I am so excited to be speaking with you both today for Chirp Chat, and thanks for joining me at the UW Arboretum. Today we'll be talking about bird window collisions. But first, Lisa, can you tell me about Songbird SOS and how this topic falls into the campaign's mission?
Sure. The SOS Save Our Songbirds campaign focuses on 3 things people can do at home. The first one is to add some native plants that are good for birds that help provide them food and shelter. The second one is to prevent birds from flying into their windows because it's a serious problem that kills a lot of birds. And the third one is, if you're a coffee drinker like I am, and 66% of us are in the United States, to buy coffee that is grown on farms that protect bird habitat. As we're learning, preventing birds from flying into windows is incredibly important. It's one of the biggest ways that humans directly lead to bird deaths. And a new study came out just a few months ago that showed that windows are even more deadly for birds than what was previously expected. So for about the last 10 years, studies had suggested that up to 1 billion birds a year died in window collisions in the United States. But this research that just came out, based on them actually observing experiments in which birds collided with windows, they raised the estimates to be more like 3.5 billion, so 3 times the amount. And also interesting from that study is they found that in 50% of the cases, the collision, there was no visible evidence that a bird had collided. There was no dead bird lying on the ground. There were no smudges or feathers or other signs. So, it just is that idea that these are happening even more than what we thought. And the good news is that there are easy ways for people to take action to prevent that from happening. And with bird migration coming up, that's something really important to do.
Right, and so that's something that brings me to my first question is, Brenna, why is it important to keep track of bird window collisions? Why does this matter?
Well, I think some of it has to do with our own psychology, right? As people, we often have the feeling that we don't believe it unless we see it, And so when we are intentionally looking and watching for evidence of this, it just helps us feel a little more solid in this statement that, birds hit windows way more often than we would have expected. And whenever I talk about this with folks, about birds hitting windows, I ask people, how many of you in the room have seen or heard a bird hit a window? And every single hand goes up. So this is a really common thing, way more common than what we like to think. And solving some of those window problems will go a really long way in making sure that we have birds in the environment for a lot longer. So this is a problem, an environmental problem that we have a bit more control over. And so it's a really nice tool for conservation because, you put up a window treatment and instantly that problem window is no longer a problem.
And so when I'm thinking about how the bird navigates the world, what makes them susceptible to window collisions?
So there are a few main drivers for why birds hit windows. And the first has to do with what they see in it. So windows are really reflective. If you look at a window, you often can see the reflection of a tree or a bird feeder. They don't know what a window is and what happens if they hit it. All they see is something that looks like a really nice tree to go perch in. So the reflection is a really big driver for collisions. Another problem is that sometimes the way that buildings are laid out, the windows can run parallel to each other. So imagine a window on the front side of the house and a set of windows on the back side of the house, and you can see straight through both sets of windows. It's called a pass-through effect. So it creates this illusion that a bird could fly right through what looks like open space, and then instead it hits the hard surface of glass. A lot of songbirds, which are primarily the birds that are affected by window collisions, a lot of songbirds migrate at night. And so having lights on is an important thing to be conscious of because birds are attracted to light, especially in the dead of nighttime. So while the lights themselves don't kill birds, the glass does, the actual draw effect of those lights on is significant as well. And then just like the basic physiology of a bird, songbirds' eyes are placed on the sides of their heads so that they can better see predators around them, but it changes the way that they perceive depth, right? Especially for something that's reflective like glasses. And so birds also have hollow bones to make them light enough that they can fly, which also means that if they hit something hard, they're much more fragile and likely to get severely injured from it.
So when we're noticing injured birds or dead birds around these windows, is there a bird more often than others that are affected by this issue?
Yeah, there are certain species that are a lot more vulnerable to it, and there have been studies that categorize the ones that are most at risk, and some of it has to do with their population size. So like a species that is already in decline and often hits windows gets bumped high up on that vulnerable list, because they just don't have a lot of birds on the planet anymore for them to lose that many. So ruby-throated hummingbirds are an example of a species that's higher risk because they fly a lot, they fly quickly, they are small, and so they often can try and fit into tighter spaces. And so just the way that they interact with backyards makes them more likely to be around windows. And so there are species like that just are much more vulnerable. So in our Bird Collision Corps program, there are like 9 or 10 species that our volunteers pick up more than other species. And these are birds that have hit windows. So like cedar waxwings are on that list of commonly found birds that have hit windows. Ruby-throated hummingbirds, yellow-bellied sapsuckers, American robins, mourning doves, Tennessee warblers. So there's a wide variety of species. Many of them are long-distance migrants, which makes sense, because in spring and fall, these birds have to fly, and they're flying fast, and so they're just more likely to be flying in an area where there's a building. And birds that aren't usually found by our volunteers anyway are raptors. Once in a while, we'll have a raptor that hits a window. Turkeys, once in a while. Very rarely, like a duck or waterfowl hitting a window. So there's just like certain categories of birds that are more likely to be around buildings and more vulnerable to collisions.
And I know there's a volunteer program that you mentioned called the Bird Collision Corps. Can you tell me a little bit about the work that these volunteers do?
Yes, that's a great question. So the Bird Collision Corps is a volunteer citizen science program that Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance, in partnership with a number of other groups, UW-Madison, the Dane County Humane Society Wildlife Center, American Bird Conservancy, and then a bunch of site hosts. So we all work together to train volunteers, and those volunteers go out to their assigned building once a week during spring and fall migration, and they're looking for evidence that a bird has hit a window in that spot. Sometimes they find it and sometimes they don't. So evidence of a bird hitting a window would be a dead bird below the window, injured bird that's still alive, probably near the windows, and a smudge or feathers stuck to the window. So the volunteers conduct their surveys by walking around the base of the building and following the protocol for where to scan the ground to look for birds. And then if they find a bird, they document it using iNaturalist. And we have projects within iNaturalist set up for this program. So then at the end of the season, after all these volunteers have spent hundreds of hours surveying buildings in the Madison area, we analyze it and then we report out both to the volunteers and to the site hosts, the building owners, so that ideally if our volunteers have found a collision hotspot, we have a way to suggest that the window be addressed to reduce collisions in the future. A lot of it has to do with what you were saying about, wanting to collect data. This is a really big reason why we do this. The issue of window collisions has been well studied. throughout the country and around the world. But in a lot of cases, it's human nature to think, yeah, but here, like, how do we know this is happening here? And so this is a way for us to gauge the magnitude of the problem in the Madison area, and then ideally put that information to work. So this data set that our Bird Collision Corps volunteers collected helped put together and influence the Bird Safe Glass Ordinance in Madison that was passed in 2020 and then, went through some litigation, was cleared in the end of 2023, and then Middleton passed the matching ordinance in early 2024. And so it's like kind of the ripple effects of a project like this is really incredible and inspiring, and I hope empowering for the volunteers who participate in it.
Can you tell me more about that Madison became the first city in the state to enact this bird-friendly law? Can you tell me a little bit more about like the details of how this came to fruition?
Yeah, so in the early stages of conversations about this ordinance, there was a lot of questions about Madison is in a great natural area. We have the lakes, we have tons of natural areas here, we have lots of people who garden for birds. So it seems to fit that if we are so proud of our natural resources that we do something to protect them, right? So with the Bird Collision Corps data, we are having conversations with folks at UW and American Bird Conservancy and then the city about this bird safe glass ordinance idea. There are other cities that have passed ordinances like this. Toronto was the first, I believe. At this time, when we were talking about doing this in Madison, New York City had just passed a really strong ordinance. There are a bunch of different cities that have similar ordinances and have done it successfully. So, we wanted to be able to support the city in coming up with a solution to new construction projects that would ensure that if they're going to be designed in this modern, glassy aesthetic, that they do it in a way that doesn't add to the problem of billions of birds dying every year. So, fortunately, there are solutions to this. There are glass companies that bake or etch a pattern into the glass. It's called frit, F-R-I-T. And so those patterns are in the production stage of glass. And so they come to the building already bird safe. And there are lots of other ways a person can design a building that uses less glass or uses it in a different way. Maybe there's a solar shade or some kind of screen that goes on the outside of the glass, to be able to just be a little more cognizant of our impact on birds and collisions. So the ordinance requires that any building that is 10,000 square feet or more that uses a certain amount of glass use bird safe glass. So that could be frit, like the pattern that's baked or etched into the glass. And that frit would have to be in a 2-inch by 2-inch grid or spacing in some way where nothing on the glass is more than 2 inches apart from something else. That 2-inch rule is really important because birds are really great at flying. They can try and squeeze through tiny spaces, especially small birds like hummingbirds. And so that 2-inch rule makes sure that it's the most effective pattern on the glass to reduce collisions. So in addition to these large buildings that use a large amount of glass, it also includes like bus stops. As you can see in Madison, there are a lot of new bus stops coming in because, the city is redoing their bus route. So all these bus stops that are all glass use bird safe glass. So, anything that's at the ground level that is fully glass needs to use like a frit pattern or some way of preventing birds from hitting the glass.
Wow, so we're already seeing this ordinance come into play here in the city. And so, Lisa, I want to ask, we're talking all about this bird-friendly glass, but where can people kind of see buildings throughout Milwaukee or Madison that already have this bird-friendly glass in place?
Sure. I'm going to start with Madison, and since that's what I know best. As Brenna mentioned, all along University Avenue is where you can see a lot of the bus stations that have the bird-friendly glass. So if you're driving into Madison, Whole Foods on University Avenue is another prominent one that's got it. And just around, if you go around the Capitol Square, Embassy Suites is a hotel that just opened within the last month. They've got it. and you can see a number of other apartment buildings right in that area. So through a partnership with the Bird Collision Corps, with SOS Save Our Songbirds, with the zoo, and Feather Friendly, one of the most prominent buildings at our zoo is the building that houses the carousel, which that was one of the buildings that when Brenna's volunteers did their rounds during the spring bird migration, it was found to have more of a problem than others. So anybody who takes their kid down to enjoy riding the camel or the zebra on the carousel will be able to see that glass. In Milwaukee, again, another fun place to see it is the Milwaukee County Zoo. So not only have they spent a lot of time putting up some type of a feather-friendly or kaleidoscape product on the windows that have a problem, but last year they opened a backyard bird habitat. And it's got all kinds of examples of different window treatments. So, Brenna, do you know of other Milwaukee sites that would be good to steer people to?
Yeah, I think of the Pfizer Forum where the Milwaukee Bucks play is a bird-friendly building. It's actually the first bird-safe glass arena in the entire world. And it's really something to be proud of that this huge building decided to take the initiative to put in this bird-safe glass and really show that responsibility to the environment and the community around them. So I think that's a really big accomplishment and something to be proud of.
So how can people at home make bird-friendly windows for themselves?
I love that question. Home owners have lots of options. And in fact, there are so many options it can be a bit overwhelming. Fortunately, American Bird Conservancy is a national nonprofit. They've done a ton of research on this. They have a database where they've tested methods for making windows bird safe and then given them a score for how effective they are. So some really good options that we like to recommend are, I'll just list a few and talk about each of them. Insect screens are a really great starting point. They're super effective at reducing collisions. They have one of the best scores you can get for window treatments that American Bird Conservancy gives out. Some other sort of do-it-yourself options. A lot of people really like paracord curtains. These are dangling strings in front of the window. It goes on the outside of the window. And they're made from paracord, which is a nylon slippery material that's used in parachutes. So it doesn't get tangled up. It doesn't attract all the debris and get gunked up with leaves and ice and whatnot. It doesn't decompose quickly, and they're really effective. So these strings are spaced out every few inches, and then they kind of move in the breeze. And the bird sees them moving. They can see it's a 3D object and that there's something there. Then they shouldn't try to get to it. So people also really like the dots. You may have seen these dots in different windows, but they are a small, like a 1/4 inch wide dot or tiny square that is spaced out 2 inches apart from each other. So it forms kind of a grid on the window. Oil-based markers are another nice option. They're a weatherproof thing that you can buy online, or in craft store, but look for the oil-based marker indicator. And you can draw a design on the outside of the glass. It could be dots or lines or whatever design you put on there, whatever window treatment you choose. You shouldn't leave any gaps that are more than 2 inches wide. That's the rule of thumb. That has been studied by American Bird Conservancy as the most effective way to reduce collisions, is to make sure that everything is 2 inches or closer together.
Well, at the end of every Chirp Chat, I love for guests to shine a spotlight on a bird for the month. So I would like to ask each of you, what bird would you like to highlight this month? Brenna, I'll start with you.
I'm going to highlight a bird that doesn't usually get impacted by window collisions, if that's okay. Which is the bald eagle. The bald eagle is such a wonderful conservation success story where not that long ago, 50, 60 years ago, they were on the brink, and through a lot of different people working together and being thoughtful about the ways that our actions impact birds, we eliminated DDT from the environment, which was a big thing for bald eagles and other raptors. We work together with different groups to be able to save habitat and clean up the water. And so it's just like such a wonderful way to represent collaboration and people being intentional about saving things that they care about. And everybody loves bald eagles. Like, everyone has a bald eagle story. And when we see them, even though they're fairly common in Wisconsin now, every time you see one, it just kind of makes you pause and enjoy it. So, this time of year is fun because there are these big, full-size, fully grown, but immature bald eagles flying around that are dark brown from head to tail. And it's just such a wonderful sign of, this is success in conservation. This is one example, and that, we did it once, we can do it again.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
Oh my gosh, that's so hard. What a high bar. I should. They'll know that I'm the backyard birder in the pair here. My favorite bird to watch at this time of the year would be the American goldfinch. I should say they're a small bird that has a bright yellow color. It's got black wing that has some little white stripes on them. And it's just, it's almost like a flying lemon. It's that bright and vibrant yellow. And it has kind of a bouncy flight pattern. It's one that's attracted to feeders. So it's likely that people are seeing it around their home if they've got a feeder, but also if they're going to kind of weedy edges and prairies like that, they'll see it as well. But I believe it's the latest nester in Wisconsin. And so it's one that people can look for still feeding young and things like that. And sometimes they don't take off until late September.
I love that. And just similar to the American goldfinch and the bald eagle, I will always remember the first time I saw each of them. So, well, thank you both so much for speaking with me today and helping me learn so much more about making places more bird friendly.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been so fun.
Brenna Marsacek is the Director of Outreach for the Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance. Lisa Gomnitz is the coordinator for SOS Save Our Songbirds. They spoke with Lake Effect's Excret Nunez for a monthly series we call Chirp Chat.